Welcome everyone today to our IHE Cardiology Domain webinar. We're very excited to have you join us as we discuss the excitement within cardiology. Today we have presenting with us Dr. Jerry Serwer, co-chair of the Planning Committee, Dr. David Slotwiner, co-chair of the Planning Committee, Nick Gawrit from heartbase, Chris Melo from Philips Healthcare, and I'm Paul Dow, the Secretary of the Planning and Technical Committee. We've got a few topics of interest that we will present here, and kicking off the conversation today will be Dr. Jerry Serwer. Take it away, Jerry.
Thanks, Paul. I'm Jerry Serwer, a pediatric electrophysiologist from the University of Michigan. What I wanted to do today, to begin with, at least for the first few minutes, is to sort of set the stage or the rationale behind what the cardiology domain has attempted to do from the standpoint of saying these are what are the characteristics that are important to the cardiology world and how do we best go about meeting those needs. Clearly, cardiology is not only inpatient-oriented but also outpatient-oriented, and the distinction between those two is becoming increasingly blurred. Procedures that used to be predominantly inpatient-oriented, like catheterizations, electrophysiologic procedures, have now become more and more outpatient-based. So that distinction is becoming very blurred, and one that really has to be dealt with. The domain really is heavily procedure-oriented, both diagnostically and interventional or therapeutically. And many people require data and contribute to the data acquisition. Not only the cardiology clinicians, but physician extenders, technicians, medical assistants, and even non-cardiology clinicians. One of the biggest contributors, obviously, is anesthesia, as more of our procedures are now done utilizing anesthesia expertise. All of this really generates huge data sets, and the problem that we have is not all of the data sets are at the same place. They tend to be in multiple, if you will, silos, which is an issue that really needs to be dealt with. All of this data is required for the numerous reports that are required, from the pre-procedure report down through discharge report, referring clinician letters, and even the patient letters and patient instructions following the procedures. Next slide, Paul. So what is it that we need? We need to, one, avoid entering the same data multiple times, and ideally avoid entering data manually. That's a huge source of error that really needs to be addressed. And everyone requires access to all of the discrete data, no matter where it resides. The consumers for this information and the reports it generates are not only the electronic health record and the health information exchanges, but also billing, payers, regulatory agencies, numerous registries which are now so important to the way that we practice. The patients are now requiring access to this data more and more, as appropriately they should. And, oh yeah, the clinicians need it as well. Next slide, Paul. And now the problem we have is that it's not only the clinical side of things, but also the C-suite, the executive suite, the business people, all have significant investments in this. Cardiology is an expensive specialty to maintain and set up in an institution, and therefore return on investment becomes exceedingly important. You can't just increase the cost of the procedure. Procedure charges are pretty much fixed these days, and if anything, are going down. So how do you improve your return on investment? You do that by increasing efficiency, and hopefully by that decreasing costs. And at the same time, they have to be sure they're meeting the needs of the patient and the clinicians. There are also multiple quality improvement initiatives, which are now being linked to reimbursement, and accreditation issues, not just through the Joint Commission, but also such agencies as the Intersocietal Accreditation Commission, the ACC and their accreditation arm, American College of Radiology. So there's multiple accreditation agencies that need to be brought into the loop. And obviously, things change rapidly these days. Healthcare in general is changing rapidly, almost on a daily basis. And so it has to be something that the vendors can deal with, whether that's simply adding new data fields, which is not so simple, to changing the way that practice and the procedures are performed, and obviously governmental regulations, which also change quite frequently. The vendors have to respond to this quickly, and we need to do all that we can to make that occur. Next slide. Obviously, to do this, cardiology needs to standardize. Data models need to be the same across silos if you can't eliminate the silos per se. A common data model, a common or standard nomenclature have to be in place. Now, there's lots of issues there. Where do they come from? Who maintains them? But nonetheless, it has to be considered. A standardized workflow, at least within a single institution, hopefully across a specialty, makes life much simpler for everybody, particularly industry. A standardized reporting structure. I think people are really beginning to now see the necessity of standardized reporting, but we'll hear about this a little later in the seminar. And finally, getting back to a further comment about data models is semantic and syntactic interoperability. How do we maintain a data dictionary that not only is a common dictionary, but unambiguous, so that the same term in one institution means the same as the same term in a different institution? Next, Paul. Now, certain things that we need to avoid. Obviously, proprietary or site-specific data elements. Again, getting back to the need for a common data dictionary that's maintained across the whole domain of cardiology. Duplicative testing needs to be avoided as much as possible, particularly when that's due to something like we just don't have access to the old report, and therefore you repeat the test. That's really unacceptable. And as I said, manual data entry needs to be avoided to the extent that it can be. There's lots of other things that have come into play to help this, not only improving data interfaces between acquisition units, be it hemodynamics in cath or electrophysiologic measurements, but also through the use of things like the Universal Data Identifiers, or UDI, and should I even mention possibly the Universal Patient Identifier. And we need to stop reinventing the wheel. We need to address things only for specific, not only for specific situations, but in general. If you're going to put a lot of work into a profile, make it universally applicable across the domain, not just to a very specific thing, as an example, to a single registry, but make it applicable to all data registries with only minor changes. Next, Paul. Now, what does cardiology domain really need? Well, the first thing it needs, obviously, is more input from the clinicians who are going to be affected by its work. And industry, who provide the solutions. We can't expect to say to industry, you got to do this, have at it. We need to give them guidance of what we really want, what we really expect from them, and that's part of what the cardiology domain at least has attempted to do. We certainly need closer ties with other IHE domains, which is really a method of saying we're going to take what other domains have done and utilize that work in ours so we don't have to reinvent the wheel, if you will. Some examples of that are the IDCO profile, which we've worked with the PCD domain for. We've worked some with IHE Cardiology in Japan for some profiles that they have wanted to do. But we also need to look to professional societies for guidance and policymakers, whether that's the government, accreditation agencies, payers, people that are going to set standards that we have to live by. And then finally, we need proactive customers, if you will, to encourage the use of IHE work by industry in general. If one person tells industry they need something, they may or may not get it. If a whole bunch of people tell them the same thing, it's much more likely to come about. So we need to really publicize IHE domains, the work they've done, so that people understand what it is and what it will do for them. Next slide. Finally, Cardiology Domain came up with this message map, if you will, to really outline our key goals and mission. It was presented last year in this webinar, but I thought it was useful to, again, put it out there. Now, it's hard to see in this slide, I understand, but basically it's in 3 sections. The first section promotes the benefits of IHE standardization to increase efficiency, decrease error, and hopefully decrease cost. The second issue is to manage the very large data sets that do occur. And then finally, the last block is continued recognition of the work and the interplay of consumers and industry. This was all made clear in the white paper written by Dr. Wendell that was also mentioned last year, but since the last year's webinar, it has now been published in the American Journal of Cardiology, as well as in the American Journal of Nuclear Cardiology. So if you really want to see in detail what this message map is pointing to, I would recommend looking at that.